As the CFO began his nervous recitation of quarterly projections, I allowed myself a brief glance at Daniel. He was frantically typing on his phone, likely Googling me, searching for the connection he'd somehow missed. We'd kept our relationship relatively private, my corporate headshots a far cry from the candid photos on his Instagram. Still, a thorough search would reveal our connection: the charity gala photos where we stood side by side, the industry conference where we'd presented together. In his arrogance, he had never bothered to learn the details of my career, beyond knowing I was in tech. While I could recite the specifics of his job, his colleagues, his projects, he had dismissed my work as something secondary to his own ambitions. Not once had he considered I might be his equal or his superior. The department updates continued around the table, each presentation revealing more systemic problems than the last. Meridian was in worse shape than the board had admitted, which explained their eagerness to bring in an outsider with my reputation. Product development, I finally called, deliberately using the department name rather than acknowledging Daniel directly. He cleared his throat, color high on his cheekbones. I've prepared a slide deck. Proceed, I said, leaning back slightly in my chair, face impassive. Daniel fumbled with his laptop, uncharacteristically flustered. The man I'd known had been confident to the point of arrogance, always the smoothest presenter in any room. Now he struggled to connect to the projector, dropping his clicker twice before managing to advance to his first slide. As everyone can see, he corrected hastily, we have 3 major product launches scheduled for Q4, including our flagship security software upgrade. I watched him with clinical detachment as he stumbled through his presentation, missing key points I'd identified in my review. The Daniel before me was a shadow of the man who'd once commanded rooms with his charisma, the man who'd convinced me we were soulmates within weeks of meeting. What about the security vulnerabilities in version 2.4? I interrupted, raising an eyebrow. Your report doesn't address the critical issues flagged by the QA team last month. Daniel froze, clearly unaware I'd accessed those reports. We're addressing those in the next sprint cycle. According to the timeline I reviewed, those fixes were due 2 weeks ago. I flicked through my tablet, though I didn't need to check. I'd memorized the details. The delay puts our major banking clients at risk. Unacceptable. The room had gone silent, executives exchanging glances as they witnessed their colleague being publicly challenged by the new CEO. What they didn't know was that Daniel had canceled our engagement exactly 2 days after those fixes were due. Perhaps the work crisis had contributed to his personal decision, or perhaps he was simply careless in all aspects of his life. We've been understaffed, he responded, an edge creeping into his voice. Resources have been allocated to the new mobile platform launch. A launch that's now been delayed 3 times, I noted, glancing around the table. We'll discuss department resource allocation tomorrow. For now, I want those security patches expedited. Finance can approve emergency contractor funds if needed. Daniel nodded stiffly, unable to argue with the directive. I could read the questions in his eyes. How long had I been pursuing this position? Had I known about it when we were together? Was our entire relationship just a corporate espionage strategy? The final thought almost made me laugh. If anything, our relationship had been a liability in my career, not an asset. I'd nearly withdrawn my name from consideration when I learned he worked at Meridian. But then he'd left, choosing his ex-girlfriend Alyssa over me, and suddenly there was no conflict to navigate. That concludes our initial meeting, I announced after the last department update. I'll be meeting with each of you individually over the next week. Please have your detailed strategic plans and team assessments ready for review. As the executives gathered their materials, I added casually, Mr. Harrington, a word before you go. The room emptied quickly, curious glances thrown over shoulders as Daniel remained seated, his knuckles white against the polished conference table. When the door closed behind the last executive, silence stretched between us, heavy with unasked, Questions. Eliza, he finally began. I don't understand. Ms. Morgan in the office, I corrected, my voice cool. We should establish that boundary immediately. He flinched. This is insane. How long have you been planning this? Planning what, exactly? My career? I raised an eyebrow. I've been pursuing CEO positions for years. The Meridian opportunity arose 4 months ago while we were still engaged. I was in final interviews when you decided to reconnect with Alyssa. His face flushed at her name. You never mentioned you were interviewing here. You never asked about my career moves. Too busy reminiscing about your college glory days with your ex, I suppose. The barb hit its mark. Daniel had reached out to Alyssa after a college reunion, their text conversations growing longer and more frequent, until one weekend he'd flown to Chicago to get closure, and returned with the realization that she was his true love. The woman he'd dated for 2 years in college somehow outweighed the future we'd planned together. This is a conflict of interest, he said suddenly. The board can't possibly approve if they know our history. They're aware I have prior connections. To Meridian personnel, I replied smoothly, not specifying which connections or their nature. I disclosed everything necessary during the vetting process. This wasn't entirely true. I'd mentioned knowing some team members but hadn't detailed my romantic history with Daniel, a calculated omission that could be explained as professional discretion rather than deception. You can't be serious about staying, he pushed back, running a hand through his dark hair, a gesture so familiar it sent an unwelcome pang through my chest. One of us needs to leave, and I've been here for 5 years. 3 of which were spent in middle management before your surprisingly rapid promotion last year, I noted. The promotion that coincided with you working closely with former CEO Blackwell, who's now under investigation for favoritism and financial impropriety. Daniel paled. Blackwell's resignation had been positioned as a retirement, but industry insiders knew federal investigators were circling. I'd done my homework on every executive, especially Daniel, whose career trajectory showed suspicious jumps that couldn't be explained by performance alone. Are you threatening me? He asked, voice low. I'm stating facts, I replied, gathering my materials. Meridian needs a product development division that delivers on time and within specification. So far, the evidence suggests yours doesn't. Fix it, or I'll find someone who will. I stood, smoothing my skirt with one hand. My personal history with employees is irrelevant to my decisions as CEO. You'll receive the same opportunities and scrutiny as everyone else. What you do with that is up to you. Daniel remained seated, staring at me with a mixture of anger and disbelief. You've changed. No, Daniel. I'm exactly who I've always been. You just never bothered to look closely enough to see it. I moved toward the door, then paused. Individual meetings begin tomorrow. Have your complete department assessment ready by 9 a.m. Your time slot is first. I could feel his eyes on me as I left, could practically hear the wheels turning in his head as he tried to formulate a plan. Daniel had always been strategic, calculating. It was part of what had attracted me to him initially. Now those same qualities made him dangerous. A wounded ex with insider knowledge and a threatened career. Vanessa was waiting outside with my next schedule. Everything okay in there? Mr. Harrington looked like he'd seen a ghost when you walked in. Just establishing expectations, I replied smoothly. Has the board chair confirmed for dinner tonight? Yes, 7 p.m. at Daniel, she replied, then winced at the name coincidence. Sorry, at Daniel Restaurant, not with... It's fine, Vanessa, I assured her. And please reserve the conference room for tomorrow morning, starting at 9 a.m. Executive assessment meetings. Back in my office, I closed the door and allowed myself a moment of pure, unfiltered emotion. Anger, vindication, lingering hurt, all swirling together into a potent cocktail that I promptly forced back down. Feelings had no place in the office, especially not on my first day. My phone vibrated with a text message. We need to talk. Privately. Tonight. DI deleted it without responding. Any conversation with Daniel would happen on my terms, in my office, with clear professional boundaries. I would not give him the opportunity to manipulate me emotionally or create a situation that could compromise my position. Sitting at my desk, I pulled up the full report on product development that I'd commissioned from an outside consultant. The picture it painted was concerning. Missed deadlines, quality issues, and a troubling pattern of promising clients' features that couldn't be delivered on schedule. Most of these problems had emerged in the last year, after Daniel's promotion to VP. The question was whether his department's failures stemmed from incompetence or sabotage. Either way, I needed to address them swiftly, personal history aside. My computer chimed with an email notification, an invitation to Daniel and Alyssa's housewarming party, accidentally sent to my work email rather than my personal address. The subject line read, "Welcome to our new home," with a date just 2 weeks away. "You'll always be my second choice." The words still echoed in my head 3 months after Daniel had spoken them, shattering our future with the casual cruelty of someone who'd already moved on. I stood at the window of my new corner office, 40 stories above Manhattan, watching the city lights blink on as dusk settled over the skyline. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd been hired as the new CEO of Meridian Technologies while he still thought I was nursing my broken heart in our once shared apartment. "Ms. Morgan, the executive team is assembled in the conference room," my assistant Vanessa announced from the doorway, her voice professional but warm. She'd been with the company for years, a steady presence in the corporate chaos of recent months. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." "Thank you, Vanessa. And remember, it's just Eliza." I smoothed down my Saint Laurent suit, unconsciously running my fingers over the space where my engagement ring used to sit. "Old habits." "Of course, Eliza." She smiled, but we both knew the formality would return tomorrow. Some boundaries were necessary, especially now. I gathered my tablet and the folder containing profiles of every executive I was about to meet, although one particular file had received more scrutiny than the others. Daniel Harrington, Vice President of Product Development, my ex-fiancé. The man who'd left me 3 months ago to reunite with his college sweetheart, canceling our wedding with a text message and a half-hearted apology delivered over boxes of his belongings. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had been methodically pursuing this position for the past year, long before our relationship imploded. Meridian Technologies represented everything I'd worked toward in my career. Innovative, growing, but desperately in need of new leadership after their founder stepped down amidst rumors of impropriety and flagging profits. The board had approached me based on my track record of turning around struggling tech companies, unaware of my personal connection to one of their executives. I hadn't volunteered the information during the interview process. Some might call it deception. I considered it strategic privacy. I took one last look at myself in the reflection of the window, auburn hair swept into a sleek chignon, emerald eyes clear and focused, posture perfect. No trace of the woman who'd spent 2 weeks in sweatpants, surrounded by wedding invitations that would never be sent. That woman was gone, replaced by someone stronger, someone who understood that heartbreak was just another business problem to solve. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The conference room fell silent as I entered, 12 pairs of eyes tracking my movement to the head of the table. I recognized most of them from their photos. The CFO with his perpetual frown, the aging CTO desperate to prove he wasn't obsolete, the ambitious marketing director who'd been gunning for a VP title. And there, halfway down the table, looking like he'd seen a ghost, Daniel. His face drained of color as our eyes met, his coffee cup frozen halfway to his mouth. I allowed myself exactly 1 second to enjoy his shock before addressing the room. Afternoon, everyone. I'm Eliza Morgan, your new CEO. My voice carried easily through the stunned silence. I've spent the last month reviewing Meridian's position, challenges, and opportunities. Today, I want to hear from each of you before I share my vision for our path forward. I launched into my introduction, laying out my background without mentioning the 6 months I'd dated their colleague, or the 4 months we'd been engaged. I didn't reference the wedding venue deposits we'd lost, or the honeymoon reservations I'd canceled alone, sobbing into my phone at the kitchen table that still held his favorite coffee mug. Instead, I spoke about my previous roles, the companies I'd transformed, and my uncompromising approach to leadership. Throughout my presentation, I could feel Daniel's eyes burning into me, his confusion morphing into something darker as understanding dawned. Not only was his ex-fiancé now his boss, but she had known about this possibility when he walked away. Now, I concluded, setting down my tablet, I'd like to hear from each department head, starting with finance. So they were living together already. The knowledge shouldn't have stung, but it did. A paper cut compared to the initial devastation, but painful nonetheless. I deleted the email and turned back to my work. The past didn't matter now. What mattered was Meridian's future, my future, and ensuring that Daniel understood exactly what he'd thrown away when he decided I would always be second best. Tomorrow's meeting would be the first move in a long game. I had no intention of firing Daniel outright. That would be too simple, too clean. No, I wanted him to earn his fate, whatever it might be. If he rose to the challenge and fixed his department's problems, Meridian would benefit. If he failed, his departure would be justified by performance, not personal history. Either way, I would win, and winning, I had learned, was the best revenge of all. The city lights were fully ablaze now, reflecting off my window like stars in a parallel universe. Somewhere out there, in another timeline, today would have been different. I might have been planning my wedding, blissfully unaware of what was coming. Instead, I was planning a corporate restructuring, with my ex-fiancé's career hanging in the balance. Life's little ironies never cease to amaze me. Closing the report, I reached for my phone to check the time. A notification showed 5 missed. Calls from Daniel. Persistent as always. I silenced the device and slipped it into my drawer. Tonight was about charming the board chair, not confronting ghosts from my personal life. Tomorrow would come soon enough, and with it, the reckoning Daniel never saw coming. The thought brought a small smile to my lips as I prepared for dinner, mentally reviewing Meridian's financials rather than dwelling on the memory of the man who'd once promised me forever, only to decide I wasn't worth the commitment after all. His mistake. His loss. My gain. The game had only just begun. The board dinner had gone perfectly. 3 hours of strategic conversation over expertly prepared steaks and an outrageously priced Bordeaux. By dessert, I'd secured preliminary approval for my restructuring plan and the additional budget I'd need to execute it. As my car pulled up to my Upper East Side apartment building, I felt the sweet satisfaction of a successful first day, marred only by the unexpected complication of Daniel's presence in my executive team. The doorman nodded politely as I entered the marble lobby. "Evening, Ms. Morgan. There's someone waiting for you. Been here about an hour." My stomach tightened. Let me guess. Tall, dark hair, Brooks Brothers suit. Thinks rules don't apply to him? "That's the one," the doorman confirmed, looking uncomfortable. I told him he should call first, but he insisted it was urgent company business. Of course he did. Daniel had always been confident in his ability to bypass normal protocols, whether it was cutting in line at coffee shops or showing up unannounced at my home after I'd explicitly ignored his messages. "Thank you, Frank. I'll handle it." I strode across the lobby to where Daniel stood by the elevators, scrolling through his phone with forced nonchalance. He looked up at my approach, and I caught the momentary flash of appreciation in his eyes. As he took in my dinner attire, the fitted black dress that replaced my business suit, the loose waves my hair had fallen into after I'd removed the pins. For a split second, I was transported back to our early dates, when that look had made my pulse quicken. Now it just irritated me. "This is inappropriate," I stated flatly, keeping my voice low. "Whatever you need to discuss can wait until our meeting tomorrow." "You're seriously going to pretend this is just business?" Daniel stepped closer, his cologne, the one I'd given him last Christmas, triggering unwanted memories. "You show up as CEO without warning, humiliate me in front of my colleagues, and expect me to wait for office hours?" "What I expect," I replied, acutely aware of Frank watching our exchange, "is professional behavior from my executives. Right now, you're failing at that basic requirement." Daniel's jaw tightened. 5 minutes, Eliza. That's all I'm asking." I considered my options. Sending him away would only postpone the inevitable confrontation, and having it in the office risked being overheard by curious colleagues. Better to lance this particular boil now, on my territory, with clear boundaries. 5 minutes, I agreed. But in the lobby sitting area, not my apartment. Relief washed over his features as he followed me to the secluded seating arrangement near the fireplace. Once seated across from each other, the plush armchairs feeling absurdly like a therapy session, I crossed my legs and waited expectantly. "How long have you known?" he finally asked, leaning forward. "That I was being considered for Meridian's CEO position?" "Since April. 4 months ago. 2 months before he'd ended our engagement. While we were still together." It wasn't a question. "Yes, though my candidacy was confidential, as these things typically are." I kept my voice neutral, professional. The board approached me based on my work with TechVault and Cypress Systems. My personal connection to a Meridian VP wasn't a factor. Daniel processed this, his expression darkening. "So when I told you about Alyssa, when I ended things, I was in final round interviews for your company's CEO position," I finished for him. Ironic timing. Jesus, Eliza. He ran a hand through his hair, that familiar gesture again. "Why didn't you tell me?" The audacity of the question nearly made me laugh. "You didn't give me the opportunity. As I recall, you texted that we needed to talk, came home with your bags already packed, and informed me that reconnecting with Alyssa had made you realize I was your second choice." The appropriate moment to discuss my career prospects never quite materialized. He had the decency to wince. "I handled that badly. You think?" The cool facade cracked slightly, a flash of the hurt I'd so carefully contained. I reined it in immediately. "This puts us in an impossible situation," Daniel continued. "The power, dynamic, our history. The board needs to know." "The board hired me to turn Meridian around," I countered. "My ability to do that job isn't affected by our past relationship unless you make it an issue." "So I'm just supposed to pretend my ex-fiancé isn't suddenly my boss? That watching you command the same conference room where we used to have department meetings doesn't mess with my head? You managed to compartmentalize quite effectively when juggling a fiancé and an ex-girlfriend," I pointed out, unable to resist the barb. "Consider this an opportunity to further develop that skill." The hit landed. Daniel's expression hardened. "That's not fair. Neither was canceling our wedding because you reconnected with your college girlfriend, yet here we are." I glanced at my watch. "Your 5 minutes are up, and I have an early meeting tomorrow. With you, as it happens." I stood, smoothing my dress. "I suggest you use tonight to prepare your department assessment rather than lingering in my lobby. Based on the reports I've reviewed, you have significant ground to cover." Daniel stood too, frustration evident in the set of his shoulders. "This isn't over, Eliza, Ms. Morgan," I corrected again. "And yes, it is. Our personal relationship ended the day you packed your things." What remains is a professional association that will be judged entirely on performance metrics and business results. As I turned to leave, he caught my arm, not roughly, but with enough pressure to stop me. You know me, Eliza. You know I won't just accept this situation. I looked pointedly at his hand until he released me. That's the problem, Daniel. I do know you. Your ambition, your charm, your talent for convincing people to give you what you want. I took a step back. I also know what happens when you don't get your way. The difference now is that I'm no longer the woman desperate for your approval. I'm your CEO. Without waiting for his response, I walked to the elevator, spine straight, heels clicking deliberately against the marble floor. Only once the doors closed did I allow myself to exhale shakily, the encounter having taken more emotional energy than I'd anticipated. By morning, I'd packed those emotions away again, arriving at the office by 7 a.m. to prepare for my executive meetings. Daniel's assessment was scheduled for 9 a.m., which gave me time to review his department's metrics one more time and center myself for the confrontation that would inevitably follow. Precisely at 9, my assistant announced his arrival. Mr. Harrington is here for his 9 a.m. Send him in. Daniel entered looking impeccably professional in a charcoal suit and blue tie that brought out his eyes. The same outfit he'd worn when proposing, a fact I'm sure he remembered. He'd always been strategic about his appearance. "Good morning, Ms. Morgan," he said, emphasizing my surname with the barest hint of sarcasm. "Mr. Harrington?" I nodded toward the chair across from my desk. "Please sit." He placed a leather portfolio on my desk, his department assessment presumably, before taking a seat. The document was thick, professionally bound, clearly prepared well in advance of my arrival. Not thrown together overnight as I'd implied. I opened it, scanning the executive summary while he waited. The report was comprehensive and addressed many of the issues I'd identified, suggesting Daniel was more aware of his department's shortcomings than his presentation yesterday had indicated. "This is thorough," I acknowledged, looking up to find him studying me carefully. Though I notice the implementation timeline for the security fixes remains weeks away, despite yesterday's directive. "If you'll turn to page 17, he replied smoothly. "You'll see I've outlined 3 potential approaches to expedite those fixes, each with different resource requirements and risk profiles. I didn't want to commit to a specific approach without your input on acceptable trade-offs." Surprised, I flipped to the indicated page. He was right. The section detailed various approaches with clear-eyed analysis of the pros and cons for each. It was exactly the kind of strategic thinking I expected from a VP, but hadn't seen in yesterday's presentation. "This contradicts your performance in yesterday's meeting," I noted, leaning back slightly. "Why the discrepancy?" Daniel's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "Yesterday, I was ambushed by my ex-fiancé appearing as my new CEO without warning. Today, I'm prepared. Fair enough. And the other issues? Missed deadlines on the mobile platform? Quality concerns with the client portal?" He gestured to the relevant sections of the report, each addressed with specific corrective actions and preventive measures. The mobile platform delays stemmed from changing requirements from marketing, which I've documented in Appendix C. The quality issues were due to rushed testing cycles, also documented, along with a revised QA protocol that's already being implemented. I studied him across the desk, trying to reconcile this competent executive with the floundering presenter from yesterday. Was this the real Daniel? The VP who'd earned his position through merit rather than connection? Or was it a carefully crafted performance designed to disarm me? "Your department has underperformed for 3 consecutive quarters," I stated. "These corrective actions should have been implemented months ago." "They were proposed months ago," he countered, an edge entering his voice, "and repeatedly denied by former CEO Blackwell, who prioritized new feature development over quality and stability. I've included copies of those proposals and his rejections in Appendix D." That gave me pause. I hadn't seen those proposals in my review materials. If Daniel was telling the truth, it painted a different picture of his department's struggles. I'll review those documents, I conceded. But regardless of past rejections, you're now accountable for implementing these changes and delivering results. Understood. He matched my professional tone, though I could see the muscles in his neck tense. I've already scheduled department meetings to realign priorities based on your feedback. The team is prepared to work extended hours to address the security vulnerabilities. I nodded, making a note in my tablet. I'll expect daily progress reports until the patches are deployed. Of course. He hesitated, then added, There's one additional matter not covered in the report, the Anderson project. The name wasn't familiar. Explain. It's an experimental initiative I've been running with a small team, off the books, using discretionary development resources. We've been exploring a new approach to encryption that could potentially revolutionize our security offerings. My eyes narrowed. Off the books? Blackwell didn't see the potential and denied formal resources. I believed in the concept enough to pursue it anyway. Daniel reached into his portfolio and extracted a slim folder, separate from the main report. The preliminary results are promising enough that I wanted to bring it to your attention directly. I accepted the folder but didn't open it. So you circumvented the established project approval process because you disagreed with the CEO's decision. I allocated resources that were already under my discretionary control, he clarified. No additional budget was used, and the team, members volunteered their time because they believe in the project. It was exactly the kind of maverick move that could either be brilliant innovation or dangerous insubordination, depending on results. The Daniel I'd known had always operated in that gray area, taking calculated risks that usually paid off. I'll review this as well, I said, placing the folder with my other materials. Though in the future, I expect all projects, experimental or otherwise, to go through proper channels. Absolutely. He leaned forward slightly. Which is why I'm bringing it to you now, before we advance to the next development phase. The meeting continued in this vein, professional, focused, occasionally tense but largely productive. Daniel addressed each concern I raised with specific plans and accountability measures. By the time we reached the end of our scheduled hour, I had a much clearer picture of his department's challenges and capabilities. One last question, I said as he prepared to leave. Your rapid promotion to VP last year, what prompted that? His expression remained carefully neutral. I led the team that developed our enterprise security platform, which became our most profitable product line within 6 months of launch. The promotion followed that success. And your relationship with Blackwell had nothing to do with it? Daniel's eyes hardened. Is that what you think? That I slept my way into this position? I think your career trajectory has been unusually steep, I replied evenly. And that Blackwell's judgment is now being questioned on multiple fronts. It's a reasonable area of inquiry. My performance records speak for themselves, he stated, voice tight. The enterprise platform was my concept, my architecture, my team leadership. Whatever else Blackwell may have done, he recognized genuine success when he saw it. I made another note in my tablet. Thank you for clarifying. That will be all for now. Daniel stood but didn't immediately leave. You asked yesterday if I'd changed. I haven't. But you have, Eliza. The woman I knew wouldn't use her position to settle personal scores. My fingers paused over the tablet screen. The woman you knew was a fantasy you created. Someone who would always be content as your second choice, waiting patiently while you explored other options. That woman never existed. I looked up, meeting his gaze directly. As for settling, scores, make no mistake. If your performance doesn't meet expectations, you'll be replaced. Not because of our history, but because Meridian deserves excellence. Whether you're capable of delivering, that remains to be seen. Something flickered across his face. Respect, perhaps, or realization. Without another word, he nodded and left my office, closing the door quietly behind him. I slumped slightly in my chair once he was gone, the effort of maintaining my composure taking its toll. The meeting had gone better than expected. Daniel was clearly capable, his department's issues more complex than simple incompetence. The Anderson project intrigued me, despite the unorthodox approach to its development. Most unsettling was the realization that working with Daniel might not be the straightforward exercise in professional retribution I'd anticipated. If he was actually good at his job, if his department's struggles stemmed from Blackwell's poor leadership rather than his own failings, my path forward became more complicated. A text message interrupted my thoughts. Unknown number, but the content made the sender obvious. The Anderson project could change everything for Meridian. Just need your green light. Lunch to discuss? My finger hovered over the delete button before I caught myself. This wasn't personal, it was business. If the Anderson project had genuine potential, refusing to discuss it would be petty and counterproductive to Meridian's interests. I typed a brief response. Send prospectus to my email. Will review and determine next steps. Professional. Bounded. Clear. His reply came seconds later. Already sent. You won't be disappointed. I set my phone aside as Vanessa announced my next appointment. The CFO entered, tension evident in his bearing as he prepared to defend his department's performance. I shifted mental gears, focusing on the financial data rather than lingering thoughts of Daniel and his mysterious project. Throughout the day, between meetings with increasingly nervous executives, I found myself returning to the Anderson folder, scanning the technical specifications and market analyses Daniel had compiled. The concept was genuinely innovative, a quantum-resistant encryption method that could potentially leapfrog our competitors by years. If it worked, if Daniel wasn't overselling its potential, if this wasn't some elaborate strategy to secure his position. By late afternoon, I'd made my decision. I sent a brief email to Daniel. Anderson project approved for Phase 2 development with conditions. Meeting tomorrow, 8 a.m., to discuss parameters and oversight. His response appeared almost immediately. Thank you. This is the right decision for Meridian. See you at 8. No personal comments, no attempts to blur the professional boundaries I'd established. Perhaps he was learning after all. As the workday wound down, I found myself alone in my office, the New York skyline once again transformed by twilight. My first day as Meridian's CEO had been productive, challenging, and emotionally exhausting in equal measure. I'd held my own against Daniel, established my authority with the executive team, and begun formulating the turnaround strategy the company desperately needed. Not bad for someone who, 3 months ago, had been crying over canceled wedding venues and returned gifts. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel, my closest friend and would have been maid of honor. How was day 1 with the ex? Body count? Prison time? Details needed. I smiled, appreciating her unfailing ability to lighten even the most complicated situations. Surprisingly professional, no bloodshed, yet disappointing. Dinner tonight to strategize proper revenge? I considered the offer. Rachel's company would be welcome, but I needed time alone to process the day's events and prepare for tomorrow's challenges. Rain check? Early meeting tomorrow. Call you this weekend with full report. Fine, abandon me. But remember, living well is the best revenge, unless you can get him fired. Then that's definitely better. Her message made me laugh despite myself. Living well had always been my plan. The CEO position merely accelerated that trajectory. As for getting Daniel fired, the situation had become more nuanced than I'd initially expected. If he truly was competent, if the Anderson project had real potential, removing him could harm Meridian more than help it. My responsibility was to the company now, not my wounded pride. Still, as I gathered my things to leave, I couldn't help but feel a certain satisfaction knowing that Daniel would be reporting to me tomorrow, explaining his project, seeking my approval, the exact dynamic he'd never wanted in our personal relationship, where he'd always needed to be the one in control. The elevator doors opened on the executive floor, and I found myself face to face with a woman I recognized instantly. From Daniel's social media, Alyssa Chen, his college sweetheart and current girlfriend. She was exactly as I'd imagined from her photos, petite, elegant, with a dancer's posture and the kind of effortless beauty that required no enhancement. "Oh!" she exclaimed, clearly startled. "I'm sorry, I was looking for Daniel Harrington's office. I have dinner plans with him." Of course she did. The universe had a twisted sense of humor. "You're on the wrong floor," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "Product development is 2 floors down. The security desk can direct you." "Thank you." She smiled warmly, then tilted her head slightly. "Are you new here?" "I don't think we've met at any of the company events." "Eliza Morgan." I extended my hand. "I am new, yes." Her eyes widened with recognition as she shook my hand, her grip faltering slightly. "Oh, I've heard about you." "I'm sure you have," I thought, keeping my expression pleasant. "Daniel's on the 38th floor. If you take that elevator, it will take you directly there." "Right, thank you." She stepped into the elevator I'd just exited, her composure visibly shaken. "It was, nice to meet you." "Likewise." The doors closed on her confused expression, leaving me alone in the hallway, an unexpected encounter I hadn't prepared for. Seeing Alyssa in person, the woman Daniel had chosen over me, was jarring, in ways I hadn't anticipated. Not because she was intimidating or remarkable, but because she was so ordinary. Pretty, certainly, but not the extraordinary creature I'd built up in my imagination during those dark days after Daniel left. As I took the second elevator down to the lobby, I considered the awkward dinner conversation that undoubtedly awaited them. Daniel, explaining that his ex-fiancé was now his boss. Alyssa processing the uncomfortable reality that the woman she'd replaced was now in a position of power over her boyfriend. I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. Tomorrow would bring a new round of challenges, the Anderson project, the continuing executive assessments, and the restructuring plan I needed to finalize. But tonight, as I stepped into the warm evening air, I allowed myself a moment of pure, uncomplicated satisfaction. Sometimes, karma worked in mysterious ways, and sometimes it worked exactly as it should, elevating the underestimated and humbling the arrogant. Daniel had made his choice 3 months ago, never imagining it would lead to this twist of fate. Now, we would all live with the consequences of that decision, for better or worse, in business, if not in marriage. The game continued, and I was still winning. I arrived at the office at 7:15 the next morning, determined to have time to center myself before meeting with Daniel about the Anderson project. The early hour meant the executive floor was still quiet, most of the leadership team not due in until after 8:30. I preferred these moments of solitude, when strategy could be crafted in silence without interruption. Vanessa appeared at 7:30, with coffee, black, no sugar, and the morning intelligence briefing she'd already compiled, a habit from her days supporting the previous CEO that I'd gratefully inherited. "Mr. Harrington is already here," she informed me, setting the coffee on my desk. "He's waiting in the small conference room with what appears to be an entire presentation set up." Of course he was early. Daniel had always been strategic about creating the impression of exceptional dedication, making sure decision-makers noticed his extra effort. "How long has he been here?" I asked, scanning the briefing notes. "Security logs show he arrived at 6:45. Vanessa's tone was neutral, but her raised eyebrow spoke volumes. "Shall I tell him you'll be ready at 8 as scheduled?" I considered making him wait the full 45 minutes. a small power move to reinforce our new dynamic. But the Anderson project actually interested me, and professional curiosity overrode petty impulses. No, I'll see him now. Bring the coffee with you. The small conference room was Meridian's technology showcase, with touch-enabled walls and holographic display capabilities, the perfect setting for a technical presentation. Daniel had indeed set up an impressive array of visual aids, including a physical server module displayed on the central table. He looked up from his tablet as we entered, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he'd worked through the night preparing. Good. Let him work for this. Morning, he said, straightening. Thanks for seeing me early. I took a seat at the head of the table, Vanessa placing my coffee and tablet beside me before discreetly exiting. Your project has my attention, Mr. Harrington. Let's see if it deserves it. Something flickered across his face, annoyance perhaps at my deliberately formal tone, but he recovered quickly, professional mask sliding back into place. The Anderson project represents a fundamental rethinking of enterprise encryption, he began, activating the room's display system. The walls came to life with complex schematics and code structures. Current quantum computers can already theoretically break RSA encryption. Within 5 years, they'll be able to do it practically. Most security companies are racing to develop post-quantum cryptography using established approaches. We've taken a different path. For the next 30 minutes, I listened as Daniel outlined a genuinely innovative approach to quantum-resistant encryption. The technical details were impressive, the market analysis thorough, and the potential competitive advantage significant. Most surprising was his humble acknowledgement of the project's remaining challenges and limitations, a departure from his usual overconfidence. The prototype has demonstrated promising results in controlled environments, he concluded, gesturing to the server module. But we need to scale testing and refine the implementation before commercialization. That's why I'm requesting formal approval for Phase 2, a dedicated team, proper resources, and 6 months to prove viability. I studied him across the table, genuinely impressed despite myself. This wasn't just a solid project, it was potentially game-changing for Meridian. If it worked as promised, it could position us years ahead of competitors in the critical enterprise security market. Who else knows about this? I asked, scrolling through the technical specifications on my tablet. A core team of 5 engineers. Blackwell, though he dismissed it as theoretical masturbation without immediate revenue potential. Daniel's mouth quirked slightly at the memory. No one outside the company, and you've secured the intellectual property? He nodded. Provisional patents filed 6 months ago under Meridian's umbrella. Everything's properly documented. I set down my tablet, weighing my options. The project deserved support based on merit alone, personal history aside. Denying it would harm Meridian for no reason beyond petty revenge. Exactly the kind of emotionally driven decision-making I'd promised myself to avoid. I'm approving Phase 2, I announced. You'll have your team and resources under 3 conditions. Relief washed over his features. Name them. First, this doesn't excuse the security vulnerabilities in your current products. Those fixes remain the priority on the accelerated timeline we discussed. Understood. Already in progress. Second, I want weekly progress reports on Anderson. Personally delivered. No surprises, no hidden developments. He nodded. Done. Third, you'll work with a project oversight committee that includes representatives from legal, finance, and the CTO's office. This is too important to develop in isolation. This condition clearly didn't please him. Daniel had always preferred working with minimal supervision, but he agreed nonetheless. Fair enough. When can we start? Submit your detailed resource. Requirements by end of day. I'll have approvals by tomorrow morning. I stood, signaling the end of our meeting. Don't make me regret this, Daniel. I won't. His voice held a quiet intensity that reminded me of promises made in very different circumstances. This project will transform Meridian, Eliza. You have my word. I don't need your word, I replied coolly. I need results, and it's still Ms. Morgan in this building. His jaw tightened, but he nodded. Results it is, then. As I turned to leave, he added, For what it's worth, you're exactly the CEO this company needs right now. Politics aside, the board made the right choice. The unexpected compliment caught me off guard. I paused at the door. Prove that by delivering on your commitments, Mr. Harrington. Actions over words. Back in my office, I found myself unsettled by the interaction. Daniel's project was legitimate. His approach was professional. His compliment seemed sincere. None of this aligned with the narrative I'd constructed around his incompetence and unworthiness. The remainder of my morning was consumed by executive meetings, the final 2 department heads presenting their assessments and plans. By noon, I had a complete picture of Meridian's situation. A company with strong fundamentals but poor execution, innovative ideas stifled by politics, and talent constrained by outdated structures. Blackwell's leadership had created a culture where short-term wins were prioritized over long-term strategy, where favorites received resources regardless of merit, and where challenging the status quo was career suicide. No wonder Daniel had developed his most promising project in secret. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number as I reviewed restructuring plans after lunch. I know who you are. Stay away from Daniel or everyone at Meridian will learn about your vindictive agenda. Alyssa. Our brief elevator encounter had apparently inspired a juvenile threat. I deleted the message without responding, making a mental note to have IT change my private number. The last thing I needed was Daniel's girlfriend injecting more drama into an already complicated situation. A knock at my door preceded Vanessa's entrance. Ms. Morgan, there's a situation you should be aware of. Apparently, several employees received anonymous emails this morning suggesting you were hired because of personal connections to certain executives. My stomach tightened. Let me guess. The emails imply a previous relationship with Daniel Harrington? Vanessa nodded, looking uncomfortable. HR is investigating the source, but the damage is spreading through office gossip. Several department heads have already called asking if it's true. So Alyssa had escalated from threats to action. Faster than I'd expected. Forward the email to legal, I instructed. And schedule an all-hands meeting for 3 p.m. today. It's time I address the company directly. The quarterly financial review is scheduled for 3 p.m. Move it. This takes priority. I stood, smoothing my skirt with suddenly tense fingers. And ask Mr. Harrington to see me immediately. While waiting for Daniel, I drafted talking points for the all-hands meeting. Transparency was the only viable approach. Acknowledge the past relationship, emphasize its irrelevance to current operations, and refocus attention on Meridian's future. Any attempt at denial would only feed the gossip mill. Daniel arrived looking genuinely confused. You wanted to see me? Close the door. Once he'd complied, I continued. Your girlfriend is sending anonymous emails to staff about our past relationship. Care to explain? His expression shifted from confusion to shock. What? Alyssa wouldn't. She texted threats to my personal number an hour ago, I interrupted, showing him the message. Now the entire company is buzzing with speculation about how I got this job. The timing is hardly coincidental. Daniel paled as he read the text. I had no idea. After she ran into you yesterday, she asked questions, but I never thought she'd do something like this. Well, she did. And now I'm dealing with the fallout on day 3 of my tenure. I set down my phone. I'm addressing the company at 3 p.m. To get ahead of this, I expect you to be there, and I expect this harassment to stop immediately. Of course. He ran a hand through his hair, genuine distress evident in his posture. I'll talk to her. She's not usually like this. I don't care what she's usually like. Fix it. I turned back to my computer, dismissing him. And Daniel? If any more anonymous communications circulate, I'll have no choice but to involve external counsel. Make that very clear to her." He nodded, looking shaken as he left my office. Part of me felt a fleeting satisfaction at his discomfort, quickly replaced by frustration at the unnecessary distraction. I had a company to run, an Anderson project to oversee, and a restructuring plan to implement. Petty relationship drama had no place in my agenda. By 3 p.m., the main auditorium was filled with Meridian employees, speculation and whispers creating an audible hum. I took the stage with deliberate confidence, the executive team, including a visibly uncomfortable Daniel, seated in the front row. "Thank you all for adjusting your schedules on short notice," I began, my voice carrying easily through the sound system. "I've called this meeting to address rumors that have been circulating today about my appointment as CEO." The room quieted immediately. Transparency and integrity are core values I intend to strengthen at Meridian. In that spirit, let me be clear. Yes, I had a personal relationship with Mr. Harrington prior to joining Meridian. That relationship ended 3 months ago. It had no bearing on my selection as CEO, a decision made by the board based on my 15-year track record turning around technology companies. I paused, letting the confirmation sink in before continuing. I understand curiosity is natural. However, my personal history and Mr. Harrington's are irrelevant to Meridian's operations and our collective mission. Anonymous emails and gossip only distract us from the critical work ahead. Scanning the audience, I noted the mixture of reactions: surprise, embarrassment, and in some cases, disappointment that the drama wasn't more salacious. Moving forward, I expect all communications about company business to be transparent, attributed, and professional. Any continued anonymous messages will be treated as violations of our code of conduct and investigated accordingly. I shifted topics, using the remainder of the meeting to outline my vision for Meridian's future: higher standards, clearer accountability, and a renewed focus on innovation. By the time I concluded, the mood had shifted from scandalized curiosity to cautious optimism. Thank you for your attention. Now, let's get back to building Meridian's future. The applause was polite, if not enthusiastic, as I exited the stage. Daniel caught up with me in the corridor leading back to the executive floor. "That was well handled," he said quietly. "It shouldn't have been necessary at all," I replied, continuing to walk. "I've spoken to Alyssa. It won't happen again." "See, that it doesn't." He kept pace beside me. "I had no part in this, Eliza. I'm as angry about it as you are." Somehow, I doubt that. I stopped at the elevator, turning to face him. "Your girlfriend tried to undermine my professional credibility on day 3. Don't expect me to believe you're equally affected." "I don't expect anything," he replied, frustration evident in his tone. "But I am trying to make this work professionally, despite everything. The Anderson project submission is in your inbox as requested. The security patches are ahead of schedule. I'm doing my job." The elevator arrived and I stepped inside. "Then continue doing it, Mr. Harrington. That's all I expect from you." As the doors closed, I caught a glimpse of his expression, a mixture of anger and something that might have been regret. Neither emotion was my problem anymore. The remainder of the afternoon passed in a blur of meetings and decisions. By 7 p.m., I'd approved Daniel's resource requests for the Anderson project, finalized the first phase of my restructuring plan, and prepared for the following day's board presentation. The anonymous email situation seemed contained, with no new messages reported to HR. As I gathered my things to leave, my phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Just saw on LinkedIn that you're Meridian's new CEO. Why didn't you tell me? Celebratory drinks, mandatory tomorrow night." I smiled, realizing I'd been so focused on navigating the Daniel situation that I'd neglected to properly celebrate this professional milestone with my closest friend. "You're right. I've been remiss." 8 p.m. tomorrow at Archer's? Her response was immediate. "It's a date. Can't wait to hear all the details about the ex's face when he realized you're the boss now. Pure cinema. The image made me chuckle despite the day's stress. Daniel's expression in that first meeting had indeed been priceless. Shock, disbelief, and dawning horror as he realized our new power dynamic. Whatever satisfaction that moment provided, however, was increasingly complicated by the professional reality we now navigated. I was still smiling as I entered the elevator, only to find Daniel already inside, apparently heading home himself. The doors closed, leaving us in uncomfortable proximity for the 40-floor descent. "Long day," he observed after a moment of silence. "Indeed. I wanted you to know Alyssa is deeply apologetic. She acted impulsively out of misplaced loyalty." I kept my gaze on the floor numbers as they descended. "As I said, ensure it doesn't happen again. She's not usually so." He trailed off, apparently realizing no description would improve the situation. "Territorial?" I supplied. "Understandable. She fought to reclaim you after all those years apart. Now she's afraid of losing you to the woman she already beat once." Daniel flinched. "That's not—" "It doesn't matter." I cut him off. "Your relationship? Dynamics aren't my concern unless they affect Meridian operations." The elevator continued its descent in tense silence until Daniel spoke again, his voice quieter now. "I've been thinking about what you said, about always being second choice." I stiffened. "This isn't the time or place." "I know. It wasn't true. What I said that day. You weren't second choice. I was just a coward who panicked at the finality of marriage." The elevator reached the lobby, doors opening to the evening security staff. I stepped out without responding, Daniel following. "Eliza, Ms. Morgan," I corrected automatically, though with less conviction than before. "Ms. Morgan," he amended. "I just wanted you to know that." I finally turned to face him, maintaining a professional distance in the busy lobby. "What exactly am I supposed to do with that information, Daniel? Does it change anything? Does it undo the canceled wedding? The humiliation? The fact that you're living with her now?" His expression tightened. "No, it doesn't change any of that." "Then keep it to yourself. Whatever guilt you're trying to assuage isn't my burden to carry." I nodded a goodbye to the security guard as I headed toward the exit. "I'll see you at tomorrow's presentation of the Anderson project requirements." Outside, the summer evening was humid, the sky streaked with sunset colors between the skyscrapers. My car waited at the curb, driver holding the door as I approached. Through the lobby windows, I could see Daniel still standing where I'd left him, watching me leave. Once inside the car, I exhaled slowly, the day's tension finally catching up with me. Daniel's attempted apology, if that's what it was, had knocked me off balance in ways I hadn't expected. The carefully constructed wall between professional Eliza and wounded ex-fiancé had developed hairline cracks. My phone buzzed with an email. Notification. The detailed resource request for the Anderson project, copied to the oversight committee members I'd specified. Daniel, returning to business despite our personal interaction. Perhaps he was learning to compartmentalize after all. I reviewed the document during the drive home, impressed by the thoroughness despite myself. The team composition, timeline, budget, and success metrics were all meticulously detailed. If executed properly, this project could indeed transform Meridian's market position. As we pulled up to my building, I noticed a delivery man at the front desk, holding an elaborate floral arrangement that the doorman was reluctantly accepting. "Evening, Ms. Morgan," Frank greeted me. "These just arrived for you. No card." The arrangement was stunning. Orchids and lilies in subtle whites and greens, elegant and restrained. Exactly the type I'd selected for our wedding, a fact Daniel certainly remembered. "Shall I send them up?" Frank asked. I considered telling him to trash them or donate them to the hospital across the street. Instead, I found myself nodding. Yes, thank you. In my apartment, I placed the flowers on the kitchen island, studying them in the fading evening light. A presumptuous gesture, possibly manipulation, definitely inappropriate given our professional relationship. Yet something in me couldn't quite dismiss them entirely. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, but not Alyssa this time. No guilt, no agenda, just truth. Some choices haunt you forever. DI set the phone down without responding, turning away from both message and flowers to pour myself a glass of wine. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: the board presentation, the Anderson project kickoff, the continued task of reshaping Meridian's culture. I needed clarity, not complications. Yet as I stood at my window overlooking the city, wine in hand, I found my thoughts circling back to Daniel's words in the elevator. Not second choice, a coward who panicked. It changed nothing practical. He was still with Alyssa. I was still his boss. Our wedding was still canceled. Yet the narrative I'd constructed to make sense of the rejection, that I was fundamentally less desirable, less worthy than his college girlfriend, wavered slightly. The doorman called up to announce another delivery, this time a large envelope marked Confidential, Meridian Technologies. Send it up, I instructed, curious about the after-hours delivery. The messenger handed me a sealed manila envelope with no external markings beyond my name and confidential. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note on plain paper. What? Blackwell didn't want found. You need to see this before tomorrow's board meeting. No signature, no identifying information, just a cryptic warning and a data drive that could contain anything from vital company intelligence to malware designed to compromise my computer. I set it aside, unwilling to risk plugging an unknown drive into any device containing Meridian data. Whatever it contained would have to wait for proper security protocols in the morning. As I prepared for bed, my phone chimed with an email from the board chair, requesting a private breakfast meeting before tomorrow's formal presentation. The subject line read simply, "Concerning information has come to light." My stomach tightened. First anonymous emails about my relationship with Daniel, then mysterious USB deliveries, now cryptic messages from the board chair. Someone was clearly attempting to destabilize my position. Whether Alyssa, a resentful executive, or someone with deeper motives remained to be seen. I responded accepting the breakfast meeting, then composed a message to Meridian's head of security, requesting an immediate analysis of the USB drive first thing in the morning. Whatever game was being played, I intended to understand the rules before making my next move. Sleep came fitfully, my dreams a confusing blend of board meetings and wedding venues, Daniel's face morphing between professional colleague and left behind. Fiancé. I woke before my alarm, unsettled but determined to face whatever machinations awaited at the office. The flowers still stood in my kitchen, beautiful and troubling. I left without looking at them again, armor firmly back in place as I prepared to defend both my vision for Meridian and my right to lead it, against ghosts from my personal past and whatever corporate skeletons were about to emerge from Blackwell's closets. The game had entered a new phase, pieces moving in patterns I didn't yet fully comprehend. But one thing was certain. I hadn't fought this hard to reach the CEO's office, only to be undermined by anonymous threats and painful history. Whatever the USB drive contained, whoever was attempting to destabilize my position, they would soon discover that underestimating Eliza Morgan was a mistake, one that Daniel had already made, and one I wouldn't allow anyone to repeat. The security team met me at 7 a.m. in a windowless conference room 2 floors below the executive level. Head of Security Morris Chen had the demeanor of a former military officer, precise, emotionally contained, with an economy of movement that suggested training beyond standard corporate protocols. "We've analyzed the drive in a secure environment," he explained, setting a tablet before me. "The contents appear to be legitimate Meridian files. Board meeting minutes, financial reports, and private communications from former CEO Blackwell. And, I prompted, sensing his hesitation, and they document a pattern of questionable decisions and possible financial impropriety. Chen's expression remained neutral. The files suggest Blackwell was approving projects and allocating resources based on personal relationships rather than business merit. There's also evidence he may have been manipulating quarterly reports to boost his performance bonuses. I scrolled through the summary document, a chill settling in my stomach as I recognized several key names. These executives were all fast-tracked under Blackwell's leadership. Chen nodded. Yes. The documents suggest their promotions were connected to their willingness to support Blackwell's creative accounting. Daniel Harrington's name is here. Yes, ma'am. He appears in several communications regarding the enterprise security platform launch and subsequent promotion to VP. I continued reading, the implications becoming clear. According to these documents, Daniel's meteoric rise hadn't been based solely on merit. He'd been one of Blackwell's favored lieutenants, possibly complicit in financial manipulation. Has anyone else seen these files? I asked, setting down the tablet. No. As requested, we've kept this completely confidential. Any indication who sent them? Chen shook his head. The delivery service was paid in cash. The handwriting analysis is inconclusive without samples for comparison. The drive itself was new, commercially available at any electronics store. Could be a whistleblower, I mused. Or someone with an agenda against the executives named in these files. Or both, Chen suggested. In my experience, motivations are rarely pure. I nodded, considering my options. The breakfast meeting with board chair Sandra Wilson was in 30 minutes, likely about these same issues given the timing. The board presentation on my restructuring plan followed at 10 a.m. Between those events, I needed to determine how to handle this information, and specifically, what to do about Daniel's apparent involvement. Make copies of everything, I instructed. Secure, offline storage only, and I want background checks on everyone named in these files, including deeper financial analysis than our standard vetting. Already initiated, Chen confirmed. Preliminary results should be available by end of day. I stood, gathering my materials. Thank you, Mr. Chen. Your discretion is appreciated. Of course. He hesitated, then added, If I may, Ms. Morgan, whoever sent you these files wants something. The question is whether their agenda aligns with Meridian's best interests. A fair point. Keep digging. Find out who had access to these documents originally. Someone went to considerable risk to ensure I saw them before today's board meeting. The breakfast meeting with Sandra Wilson took place at an upscale restaurant 2 blocks from Meridian's headquarters, neutral territory for a potentially difficult conversation. Wilson was already seated when I arrived, her silver bob perfectly styled, her expression giving nothing away as she greeted me. Eliza, thank you for accommodating the early meeting. Of course. I slid into the booth across from her. Your message suggested urgency. Wilson waited until after the server had taken our orders before leaning forward slightly. I received some troubling information last night. Documents suggesting financial irregularities under Blackwell's leadership, with possible involvement from current executives. So she'd received the same files. Interesting. What a coincidence, I replied carefully. I received similar documents. Her eyebrows rose. Anonymous delivery? I nodded. Someone wants us both aware of this situation, she noted. The question is why now and to what end? I have my team investigating the source, I said. But regardless of motive, the content appears legitimate. If these allegations are true, we have serious governance issues to address. Wilson sipped her coffee, studying me over the rim. Several of the executives implicated are part of your restructuring plan, including Daniel Harrington, who I understand has a complicated history with you. So she knew about our past relationship, Not surprising given the anonymous emails circulating yesterday, but her direct acknowledgement suggested the board was now officially concerned about potential conflicts of interest. My personal history with Mr. Harrington has no bearing on my professional assessment of his department or these allegations, I stated firmly. If the financial manipulation documented in these files is verified, appropriate action will be taken regardless of who's involved. She seemed to weigh my response, eyes narrowed slightly. The board hired you for your turnaround expertise and reputation for uncompromising leadership. We need that objectivity now more than ever. You'll have it, I assured her. My priority is Meridian's integrity and future success. Personal considerations are irrelevant. Good. She leaned back, apparently satisfied. Because the board is calling an emergency session after your presentation today. We'll need to address these allegations directly, with a clear plan for investigation and accountability. The server arrived with our breakfast, providing a momentary pause in the conversation. Once we were alone again, Wilson continued in a quieter tone. Between us, Eliza, the timing of these revelations isn't coincidental. Someone wants to disrupt your early tenure, either to protect themselves or to undermine your authority before you're fully established. I'm aware of the politics, I replied, cutting into my omelet with precise movements. But if these documents expose genuine misconduct, the timing is secondary to the content. Wilson smiled slightly. That straightforward approach is why we hired you. Just be prepared. Today's board meeting will test your diplomatic skills and strategic thinking. Not. Everyone will appreciate having their allies investigated. We finished breakfast discussing tactical approaches to the investigation, agreeing that an external forensic accounting firm should be engaged immediately. As we parted outside the restaurant, Wilson offered one final piece of advice. Whatever your history with Harrington, be prepared to defend your objectivity. The appearance of a personal vendetta would undermine your position, even if the allegations are substantiated. Understood. I met her gaze directly. My decisions will be based on evidence, not history. Back at Meridian, I had precisely 45 minutes before the board presentation to process everything and adjust my strategy. In my office, I found Vanessa waiting with updated meeting materials and a concerned expression. Mr. Harrington has been trying to reach you, she reported. He says it's urgent, something about today's presentation. Of course it was. If he'd received the same documents, he'd be scrambling to control the narrative. Tell him I'm in pre-board preparations and we'll speak with him afterward, I instructed, setting down my portfolio. And find out if any other executives have received unexplained document deliveries in the last 24 hours. While Vanessa made discreet inquiries, I reviewed my presentation materials, adding slides addressing the governance concerns without directly referencing the specific allegations. My restructuring plan already included enhanced financial controls and accountability measures. Now I would emphasize those elements as immediate priorities rather than midterm goals. My phone buzzed with another text from Daniel. Need to speak. With you before the board meeting. Critical information about the documents you received, not what they appear. So he knew about the files. But how? Had he received copies himself, been warned by another recipient, or, most concerning, been the anonymous sender? I forwarded the message to Security Chief Chen with instructions to include it in his investigation. Then turned my attention back to the presentation. Daniel's explanations or excuses could wait until the evidence was properly assessed. The boardroom was tense when I arrived at 9:55. Executives and directors gathered in small clusters. Conversations, dropping to whispers as I entered. Daniel sat alone at the far end of the table, his usual confidence replaced by rigid posture and a tight jaw. Our eyes met briefly before he looked away, focusing intently on his tablet. Board chair. Wilson called the meeting to order precisely. At 10 a.m., introducing me with a brief reminder of my mandate to implement transformative change at Meridian. As I took my place at the presentation podium, I surveyed the room, noting which executives appeared nervous and which maintained calm facades. Thank you, Chairwoman Wilson, I began, activating the presentation display. After 3 days of intensive review and executive consultations, I'm presenting my initial assessment and restructuring recommendations for Meridian Technologies. The first portion of my presentation outlined the company's market position, competitive challenges, and operational inefficiencies, all areas the board was already familiar with from previous discussions. The room remained attentive but subdued, tension building as I approached the governance section. Now to address an issue that requires immediate attention, I continued, advancing to a slide titled Financial Governance and Accountability. My review has identified concerning patterns in resource allocation, project approval processes, and financial reporting under previous leadership. The mood shifted instantly, subtle but unmistakable changes in posture and expression rippling around the table. Several executives exchanged glances. Daniel remained perfectly still, eyes fixed on my presentation rather than my face. In light of these findings, I'm recommending immediate implementation of enhanced controls and an independent forensic review of the past 3 years' financial decisions and reporting. I outlined the specific measures, deliberately avoiding direct accusations or names while making it clear that a serious investigation was imminent. As I concluded this section and moved to my strategic recommendations, I caught Daniel writing something in a notebook rather than typing on his tablet, unusual for someone who prided himself on digital efficiency. When the lights came up for the Q&A portion, his note was slid discreetly to the executive seated beside him, who glanced at it briefly before passing it further down the table. Board Chair. Wilson directed the first question to me. Your governance. Recommendations suggest serious concerns about past practices. Can you elaborate on the specific issues that prompted this recommendation? A perfectly staged prompt, allowing me to acknowledge the anonymous documents without seeming to have coordinated with her beforehand. I've received information suggesting potential irregularities in project approvals, resource allocation, and financial reporting under the previous CEO, I replied carefully. While this information requires verification, the patterns are concerning, enough to warrant immediate investigation by independent experts. The CFO, a Blackwell appointee named Richard Mercer, leaned forward with a skeptical expression. Are we talking about anonymous allegations? Disgruntled employee complaints? What's the credibility of these mysterious sources? The information appears to be internal Meridian documents and communications, I replied evenly. Their authenticity is being verified, but the content aligns with patterns I've observed in my operational review. Seems convenient, Mercer muttered, just loudly enough to be heard. If by convenient you mean troubling, I agree, I countered smoothly. Which is why I've recommended an independent investigation rather than drawing conclusions based solely on this information. Several questions followed about my restructuring timeline and departmental changes, temporarily shifting focus from the governance issues. Throughout these exchanges, I noticed Daniel watching me with an intensity that suggested he was waiting for a specific moment or revelation. That moment apparently came when Board Director Hargrove asked about my plans. For the Product Development Division, Mr. Harrington's department requires significant operational restructuring, I began, referencing the assessment data displayed on screen. While innovative concepts like the Anderson project show promise, basic execution and quality control have fallen short of acceptable standards. Daniel finally spoke, his voice controlled but carrying an undercurrent of tension. If I may address that point, Ms. Morgan, the execution challenges in product development stemmed directly from the resource allocation issues you've highlighted in your governance concerns. A clever deflection, acknowledging his department's problems while positioning himself as a victim of the system rather than a participant in it. That connection will certainly be examined in the investigation, I replied neutrally. In the meantime, your department's performance metrics speak for themselves. The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, with detailed questions about implementation timelines and expected outcomes. When Wilson finally adjourned the session, announcing the emergency board meeting to follow after a brief break, the room buzzed with subdued conversations as people gathered their materials. Daniel approached me immediately, his expression carefully neutral for the benefit of watching board members. 5 minutes, he requested quietly. In private, before the next meeting. I considered refusing but decided hearing his explanation might provide valuable insight, either into the situation itself or into how he planned to defend himself. My office, 2 minutes. He followed me silently up to the executive floor, maintaining a professional distance that would appear unremarkable to observers. Once inside my office with the door closed, however, his composure cracked. Those documents you received, they're being selectively presented to create a false narrative, he stated without preamble. Yes, Blackwell had favorites. Yes, he played politics with resources. But the financial manipulation? That was Mercer and Blackwell alone. The rest of us were kept in the dark. I studied him from behind my desk, looking for tells of deception. Your signature appears on several approval documents for transactions now under scrutiny. Because Mercer restructured the approval routing, I was signing off on package summaries, not the underlying transactions. He placed a flash drive on my desk. These are the complete document sets, not the cherry-picked versions you received. They show the actual approval chains and what information was visible to each signatory. I made no move to take the drive. Why would I trust your version over the anonymous source? Because unlike them, I'm putting my name on this. His eyes held mine with unwavering intensity. Someone's trying to discredit multiple executives as part of a power play. Don't let them manipulate you into doing their dirty work. And your rapid promotion under Blackwell? Your special relationship with the former CEO? Those were mentioned specifically in the documents. Daniel's jaw tightened. I earned that promotion with the enterprise platform success. Did Blackwell fast-track the approval? Yes. Was the promotion undeserved? No. The platform's market performance speaks for itself. I leaned back slightly, considering his explanation. It was plausible. The enterprise platform had indeed been Meridian's most successful product launch in years. But plausibility didn't equal truth, especially from someone with clear motivation to distance himself from the scandal. Who sent the documents, Daniel? Who benefits from this selective disclosure now? He hesitated. I have suspicions, but no proof. Blackwell had enemies inside and outside Meridian. So do several board members. That's conveniently vague. Because making unfounded accusations would make me no better than whoever sent those documents. He gestured to the drive on my desk. Look at the complete record. Make your own assessment. That's all I'm asking. Our time was up. The emergency board meeting would begin momentarily. I picked up the drive and handed it to Vanessa as she entered with my updated materials. Have security analyze this immediately. Same protocols as this morning's drive. Daniel nodded, accepting this compromise. As we walked together toward the boardroom, he added quietly, For whatever it's worth, I had no idea about the financial manipulation. If I had, I would have reported it. Your integrity isn't the issue at hand, I replied, keeping my voice professionally neutral as we approached the boardroom. The facts will determine next steps, not personal assurances. The emergency board meeting was as tense as expected, with directors divided between those demanding immediate action against all named executives and those counseling caution pending further investigation. I maintained a balanced position, recommending administrative leave for CFO Mercer, whose implication in the documents was most direct, while establishing a special committee to oversee the external investigation of all other allegations. Throughout the discussion, I noticed Daniel contributing constructively to procedural questions while careful to recuse himself from decisions directly involving product development. His composed professionalism stood in stark contrast to Mercer's, increasingly defensive posturing. By meeting's end, the board had approved my recommendations, including the Special Investigative Committee and Mercer's administrative leave. As executives filed out, Sandra Wilson caught my eye, giving an approving nod. I'd navigated the initial crisis without appearing either vindictive or naive, maintaining the delicate balance required of a CEO facing a potential scandal. Back in my office, I found Chen waiting with preliminary findings. "We've analyzed both drives," he reported. "The anonymous one contains authentic Meridian documents, but as Mr. Harrington suggested, they appear selectively compiled to implicate certain executives while minimizing others' involvement." "And the drive Daniel provided?" "Also authentic, with broader context that presents a more nuanced picture." Chen handed me a tablet displaying his analysis. "The clearest culpability remains with Mercer and Blackwell. Other executives' involvement appears limited to unwitting approval of misrepresented information." I scrolled through the comparison, noting the critical details omitted from the anonymous compilation: routing procedures that obscured underlying transactions, compartmentalized approvals that prevented comprehensive oversight, and carefully worded summaries that disguised questionable allocations. So someone wanted me to believe Daniel and other executives were complicit in financial fraud, I mused, when in reality they were more likely manipulated by Blackwell and Mercer. "That's what the evidence suggests," Chen confirmed, though the selective disclosure itself is concerning. Someone with high-level access deliberately compiled these documents to implicate specific people. "Any progress identifying the source?" "Nothing definitive yet." Chen hesitated. "However, there's an interesting pattern in terms of who wasn't implicated in the anonymous compilation, despite having similar approval authority." He showed me a list of executives conspicuously absent from the anonymous documents, despite their positions in the approval chain. One name immediately caught my attention: James Blackwell Jr., the former CEO's son, who served as VP of Strategic Partnerships. "Blackwell's son isn't mentioned once in the anonymous documents," I noted. "Exactly. Yet his signature appears on several approval chains in the complete records." Chen's expression remained neutral, but his implication was clear. He'd have both motive to protect his father's legacy and access to the internal documents. And he'd benefit from discrediting competing executives, potentially positioning himself for advancement under new leadership. I set down the tablet. "Continue the investigation. Focus on access logs, metadata, anything that might connect these compilations to specific individuals." As Chen left, Vanessa entered with an update on the fallout from the emergency board meeting. News of Mercer's administrative leave had already rippled through the organization, and the external investigation announcement was scheduled for the following morning. Also, Mr. Harrington requested a brief update regarding the Anderson project, she added. "With everything else happening, he wasn't sure if you still wanted to proceed with today's scheduled team announcement." I considered the question. The project's merit remained regardless of the current governance issues. Delaying it would only hurt Meridian's competitive position, and the oversight committee I'd established would ensure proper controls. The project proceeds as planned, I decided. Tell him to make the team announcements this afternoon. After Vanessa departed, I stood at my window, watching the city below, processing the day's revelations. If the complete evidence exonerated Daniel from knowing complicity in financial impropriety, I would need to reassess my understanding of both his character and our past relationship. My phone buzzed with a text notification, Rachel confirming our celebration drinks that evening. A welcome reminder that life extended beyond Meridian's walls and complex corporate politics. For now, I had an investigation to oversee, a restructuring to implement, and a public statement to craft explaining the sudden departure of our CFO. Personal reckonings would have to wait, though I suspected they couldn't be postponed indefinitely. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the city, I prepared for the next phase of both my professional mission and personal journey. The game continued to evolve, pieces moving in unexpected patterns, strategy adjusting to new information. Whatever came next, one thing remained certain. I would face it with the same determination that had brought me to this office in the first place, not as Daniel's discarded second choice, but as Eliza Morgan, CEO, charting her own course through choppy corporate waters. The flowers he'd sent still sat on my kitchen counter at home, beautiful, complicated, a reminder of what was lost. But lost things sometimes revealed unexpected truths in their absence, creating space for new growth and clearer vision. Time would tell whether those truths led to reconciliation or permanent separation, professional alliance or corporate rivalry. For now, the path forward required focus on facts rather than feelings, evidence rather than emotions, and evidence, unlike hearts, rarely lied when properly examined. Archer's Bar was exactly what I needed after the day's intensity, upscale but unpretentious, with private booths and bartenders who understood the art of discretion. Rachel was already waiting, champagne chilling in an ice bucket, her infectious smile a welcome contrast to the serious faces I'd navigated all day. "There she is," she announced as I approached. "Meridian's new CEO and my personal hero. Get over." "Here!" I slid into the booth, accepting her enthusiastic hug before settling back against the plush leather. "Sorry I'm late. It's been a day." "Late is allowed when you're running a tech company," Rachel declared, pouring champagne into crystal flutes. "Now we are celebrating properly. No talking about work for at least 10 minutes. I laughed, feeling tension ease from my shoulders, for the first time since morning. "Deal." Rachel raised her glass. "To my brilliant friend who went from jilted fiancé to corporate badass in 3 months flat, the ultimate glow-up." We clinked glasses, the champagne crisp and grounding. For the promised 10 minutes, Rachel filled me in on her life. The gallery she managed was hosting a major exhibition next month. Her latest dating disaster involved a man who brought his mother to their second date, and she'd finally convinced her landlord to fix the perpetually dripping faucet that had been driving her mad for months. Ordinary life, normal problems, the conversational equivalent of coming up for air. "Okay," she said finally, refilling our glasses. 10 minutes up. Now spill everything. How's it been, really? Seeing him every day, giving him orders, watching him squirm?" I traced the rim of my glass, considering how to explain the complexity of the situation. "It's not the straightforward revenge scenario we imagined over ice cream 3 months ago." "Don't tell me you're feeling sorry for him." Rachel's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "No, it's more complicated than that." I sighed, trying to organize my thoughts. The company is in worse shape than I knew. Daniel's department has genuine issues, but there are also politics at play. Someone's trying to implicate him in financial impropriety under the previous CEO. Rachel leaned forward. "Is he guilty?" "I don't think so," I admitted reluctantly. "At least not of knowing involvement. The evidence suggests he was misled along with others." "And that bothers you because it would be easier if he were corrupt," I confessed. "If I could fire him for cause and never look back. Instead, I'm in this bizarre position of potentially having to defend him against selective accusations while still holding him accountable for his department's actual shortcomings." Rachel studied me over her champagne. "You know what I think? I think you're disappointed he's not a complete villain." "That's ridiculous," I protested, a bit too quickly. "Is it? The Daniel who left you for his college girlfriend was a heartless jerk who said cruel things. The Daniel at work is competent, possibly being set up by others, and complicating your neat narrative." I sighed, unable to refute her assessment entirely. "He also sent flowers, identical to what I'd chosen for our wedding." Rachel nearly choked on her champagne. "He did not. The audacity. With a text about how leaving me haunts him and wasn't about me being second choice." I shook my head. "Meanwhile, his girlfriend is sending anonymous emails about our relationship to the entire company." "What a mess," Rachel marveled. though I have to say it sounds more interesting than my mother-chaperoned date. That made me laugh despite myself. Trust me, corporate intrigue and ex-fiancé drama are overrated. So, what are you going to do? I considered the question, swirling the remaining champagne in my glass. Professionally? Lead the company, implement my restructuring plan, oversee the financial investigation, and evaluate everyone, including Daniel, based on performance alone. And personally? There is no personally, I stated firmly. That ended when he packed his things and left. Rachel gave me a skeptical look. The flowers suggest otherwise. The flowers are irrelevant, I insisted. A moment of nostalgia or guilt on his part doesn't change the fundamental reality. He's with Alyssa, I'm his boss, and any personal entanglement would compromise my position and judgment. Very rational, Rachel observed. Almost convincing, except for the way your voice changes when you say his name. I rolled my eyes, deflecting her observation. Can we please talk about something else? Literally anything else? Your mother date guy, for instance. Rachel graciously allowed the subject change, launching into a detailed account of the disastrous evening that had me laughing until tears threatened my makeup. For the next hour, we caught up properly, discussing everything from her galleries, upcoming exhibition to my too-long-neglected apartment renovation plans. By the time we parted with promises to not let another week pass before our next get-together, I felt more balanced than I had in days, reminded that my identity extended beyond both my broken engagement and my new executive role. That equilibrium lasted until I reached my apartment building and found Alyssa Chen waiting in the lobby, perched awkwardly on a decorative bench while Frank the doorman watched her with suspicious attention. "Ms. Morgan?" Frank called as I entered. "This lady has been insisting on seeing you." I explained we don't allow unannounced visitors, but she's been quite persistent. Alyssa stood, smoothing her dress with nervous hands. Up close, she appeared younger than in photos. Or perhaps it was the uncertain expression that made her seem vulnerable. 5 minutes, she requested softly. Please. The rational choice would be to refuse, send her away, maintain boundaries, avoid potential drama. But curiosity won out over caution. What could Daniel's girlfriend possibly want from me that warranted an unannounced lobby ambush? It's fine, Frank, I assured him. We can use the resident lounge. The lounge was empty at this hour, its leather club chairs and soft lighting creating an atmosphere too intimate for the awkward conversation ahead. I chose a seat that kept appropriate distance between us, crossing my legs and waiting expectantly. Alyssa, perched on the edge of her chair, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Thank you for seeing me. I know this is unconventional. That's one word for it, I agreed neutrally. What can I help you with, Ms. Chen? I came to apologize, she said, meeting my eyes directly. The anonymous emails about your relationship. With Daniel, that was me. It was childish, unprofessional, and completely unacceptable. Her directness surprised me. I'd expected denials, excuses, perhaps even accusations, not a straightforward apology. Why? I asked simply. She exhaled slowly. Insecurity. Fear. After seeing you at Meridian, realizing you weren't just Daniel's ex but his boss, it triggered every insecurity I've had since we reconnected. And showing up at my home addresses those insecurities how, exactly? It doesn't, she admitted. But I couldn't leave things as they are. The emails were wrong, and I needed to take responsibility directly, not hide behind Daniel's explanations or apologies. I studied her, looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity. Finding none, I nodded slightly. I appreciate the direct acknowledgement. Those emails created unnecessary complications during a critical transition period. I know, and I'm truly sorry. She hesitated, then added, There's something else you should know. The flowers Daniel sent, I didn't know about them. He didn't. Tell me, I kept my expression neutral, though the revelation was interesting. That's between you and Daniel. Is it? Alyssa's voice held a note of resignation. When he came back to me, I thought we were resuming something unfinished from our past. But increasingly, I feel like I interrupted something rather than reclaimed it. The conversation had veered into territory I had no interest in navigating. Relationship counseling for my ex and his girlfriend was decidedly not in my job description. Again, that's for you and Daniel to discuss, I said, rising from my chair to signal the conversation's end. As for the emails, I accept your apology. I trust there won't be further incidents. Alyssa stood as well, nodding quickly. Of course not, and I've already spoken with HR to take full responsibility. They're expecting my call tomorrow morning. That surprised me again. Taking accountability to HR was a significant step, one that could potentially impact her own professional reputation. That's appropriate, I acknowledged. Though not required if it stops now. It's necessary, she insisted. Actions have consequences. I learned that from my father, who never took responsibility for anything. The statement seemed oddly personal given our limited interaction, but I simply nodded. Well, if that's all, I have an early morning tomorrow. Of course. Alyssa gathered her purse, then paused. One last thing. Daniel doesn't know I'm here. He'd be mortified if he knew I approached you directly. Your secret's safe, I assured her, already mentally moving on to tomorrow's challenges. At the elevator, Alyssa turned back suddenly. He was scared, you know, of marriage, of failing you, the perfect woman who had everything together. That's why he ran. Before I could formulate a response to this unexpected insight, she was gone, leaving me with one more complicated piece of the Daniel puzzle I wasn't sure I wanted to solve. Morning arrived with new developments, Security Chief Chen waiting. In my office with updated findings on the anonymous documents. We've identified the source, he announced without preamble, placing a folder on my desk. The files were compiled using Blackwell Jr.'s credentials, but the actual system access traced back to this individual. He opened the folder to reveal a familiar face. Alyssa Chen, her company ID photo paperclip to access logs and digital forensics reports. Ms. Chen works in strategic partnerships under Blackwell Jr., Chen explained. She used his credentials to access and compile the documents, though we can't determine whether he was aware of or directed her actions. I stared at the evidence, mind racing to connect the dots. Alyssa worked for Blackwell's son? That critical detail had never emerged in my background research on Daniel or in any of our interactions. Has she had this position long? I asked, scanning the employment details. 6 months, Chen confirmed. Hired shortly after Blackwell Jr. received his promotion to VP, which meant she'd been working at Meridian when Daniel and I were still engaged, a fact he'd never mentioned. Had he known? Was their reconnection at the college reunion merely a cover story for a workplace relationship? Does she have any connection to the external accounting firm we've engaged for the investigation? I asked, suspicion mounting. Chen shook his head. Not that we've found yet, but we're still digging into her background. Her father is Martin Chen, formerly of Westlake Financial, one of Meridian's early investors who lost significantly when Blackwell restructured the company 5 years ago. Another layer of complexity. So she has both a professional connection to Blackwell Jr. and a potential personal motive related to her father's history with Meridian. It appears so. Chen closed the folder. How would you like to proceed? I considered the options, weighing corporate interest against personal implications. Continue the investigation discreetly. Don't confront Ms. Chen yet. I want to understand the full picture before taking action. As Chen left, I sat back in my chair, processing this revelation in light of Alyssa's unexpected lobby apology the previous night. Her contrite visit now seemed calculated, an attempt to establish plausible deniability, or perhaps gauge how much I already knew. My phone buzzed with a meeting reminder. The Anderson Project kickoff in 15 minutes. Daniel would be there, presenting his team and detailed implementation plan to the Oversight Committee. I arrived at the designated conference room to find Daniel already set up, conversing easily with committee members as they settled around the table. He looked up as I entered, professional smile firmly in place, though his eyes held questions I wasn't ready to answer. "Ms. Morgan," he greeted formally. "We're just about to begin." "Please proceed," I replied, taking my seat at the head of the table. The presentation was predictably impressive. Daniel had always excelled at crafting compelling narratives around technical concepts. His team members spoke with genuine enthusiasm about the encryption methodology they'd developed, confidence grounded in demonstrable results rather than mere speculation. Throughout the presentation, I found myself studying Daniel with new awareness. Had he known Alyssa was at Meridian while we were engaged? Had their reunion been orchestrated rather than coincidental? And most importantly, was he complicit in her apparent scheme to selectively implicate executives while protecting Blackwell's legacy? The Oversight Committee asked pointed questions about timelines, resource allocation, and technical challenges, all of which Daniel and his team handled with competent transparency. Despite the personal complications, I couldn't deny the project's merit or the team's capability. "Before we conclude," I said as the formal presentation ended, "I have one additional question. Given the ongoing financial investigation, what assurances can you provide that Anderson's resource allocation will remain transparent and properly documented?" Daniel met my gaze directly. "We've implemented triple verification protocols for all project expenditures, with Oversight Committee review of any allocation exceeding established thresholds. Additionally, I've scheduled bi-weekly financial audits to ensure continuous compliance with corporate governance standards." A thorough answer that anticipated concerns beyond what I'd explicitly asked. Whether from genuine commitment to transparency or strategic self-preservation, Daniel was clearly determined to keep the Anderson project above reproach. "Thank you," I acknowledged. "The committee will review your implementation plan and provide any additional governance requirements within 48 hours. As the meeting concluded and committee members dispersed, Daniel approached my chair, maintaining professional distance, but speaking quietly enough to ensure privacy. "Can we talk? There are developments you should be aware of regarding the document situation." I studied him, wondering how much he knew about Alyssa's involvement. "My office, 15 minutes. He nodded, expression carefully neutral as he gathered his presentation materials. I departed separately, stopping to confer with the legal representative from the Oversight Committee before heading to my office. Daniel arrived precisely on schedule, closing the door gently behind him. "Thank you for meeting with me. You mentioned developments," I prompted, remaining at my desk rather than moving to the more informal seating area. He took a deep breath. "I've discovered that Alyssa may be connected to the selective disclosure of documents. She works for Blackwell Jr. in strategic partnerships. So he hadn't known." The genuine concern in his expression couldn't be faked. "I'm aware," I replied, watching his reaction carefully. "Security traced the document compilation to her credentials, using Blackwell Jr.'s access permissions." Daniel paled slightly. "When did you learn this?" "This morning. Though Ms. Chen made an unexpected appearance at my apartment building last night to apologize for the anonymous emails, without mentioning her role in the document situation." "Your apartment?" He looked genuinely shocked. "I had no idea. She told me she was having dinner with a college friend." I leaned back slightly in my chair. "How long have you known she works at Meridian?" His expression tightened. "Since yesterday evening. After the board meeting, I was reviewing who might have access to the specific documents in question. Her name appeared on an approval routing I'd never noticed before." "You didn't know when you reconnected with her? When you ended our engagement?" "No." His answer was emphatic. The college reunion story was true. I had no idea she'd taken a position at Meridian until yesterday. I studied his face, looking for signs of deception. Finding none, I continued. Her father is Martin Chen, formerly of Westlake Financial. Does that name mean anything to you? Daniel frowned, thinking. Westlake was an early investor. Didn't they get pushed out during the restructuring under Blackwell? Yes. Chen lost millions when Blackwell consolidated control. Understanding dawned on his face. So Alyssa has a personal motive, beyond her professional connection to Blackwell Jr. It appears that way. I tapped my pen against the desk, considering implications. The question is whether she's acting independently, or as part of a coordinated effort with Blackwell Jr., or others. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, that familiar gesture again. I confronted her last night about working here without telling me. She claimed she'd planned to disclose it once she understood my situation better, whatever that means. When I pressed about the documents, she shut down completely. Did you mention the flowers you sent me? I asked, the question slipping out before I could reconsider it. His eyes met mine, a flash of something unreadable crossing his face. No. That was personal. The admission hung between us, acknowledgement of a boundary crossed without permission or warning. Look, he continued after a moment, I know this is complicated, but regardless of our history, I think we're both being manipulated as part of a larger game. Alyssa, Blackwell Jr., maybe others, they're using personal connections to advance corporate agendas. Agreed, I replied, refocusing on the professional implications. Security is continuing the investigation. In the meantime, I suggest you consider what other information Ms. Chen might have access to through your personal relationship. Daniel nodded grimly. Already on it. I've changed all my passwords and secured my home office. And for whatever it's worth, I'm staying at a hotel until I figure out exactly what's happening here. That surprised me. You've moved out? Last night, after her evasive responses about Meridian. Something doesn't add up about her sudden reappearance in my life, and I won't be used as an unwitting pawn in whatever game she's playing. The revelation shifted my understanding yet again, Daniel apparently as much a target as an accomplice in whatever scheme was unfolding. We should keep this conversation between us for now, I decided. Appearing divided would only advantage whoever's behind this. Agreed. He hesitated, then added, For what it's worth, I'm sorry you've been dragged into this mess. You came to transform Meridian, not navigate Byzantine politics and personal complications. It's part of the job, I replied with a slight shrug. No organization is without its shadows and hidden agendas. Daniel stood, preparing to leave. The Anderson project team is clean. I've vetted everyone personally, and none have connections to Blackwell or his allies. Whatever happens with the broader investigation, the project itself is genuine. I never doubted that, I acknowledged. Your technical judgment has always been sound. It's the personal judgment I've had reason to question. A flicker of pain crossed his face, quickly masked by professional composure. Fair enough. I'll update you if I learn anything else about Alyssa or Blackwell Jr. His potential involvement. After he left, I sat back in my chair, mind racing through implications and possible strategies. The situation had evolved from simple corporate restructuring complicated by personal history to a multi-layered conspiracy, potentially involving revenge, financial manipulation, and strategic corporate positioning. More importantly, the narrative I'd constructed about Daniel, the callous ex who discarded me for an old flame, was unraveling in ways I hadn't anticipated. If he truly hadn't known about Alyssa's Meridian connection, if their reunion had potentially been engineered as part of a larger scheme, what other assumptions might prove false? My phone buzzed with a message from Security Chief Chen. New information regarding B. Janyar and A. Chen. Available to brief when convenient. I texted back immediately. Now. My office. As I waited for Chen to arrive, I found myself staring at the city skyline, watching clouds gather on the horizon. Appropriate metaphor for the brewing storm at Meridian. Whatever came next would require careful navigation of both professional waters and personal undercurrents I'd thought safely buried. The game had changed again, pieces rearranging themselves into unfamiliar patterns. But one thing remained constant: my determination to understand the truth, however complicated, however personally challenging, and to protect Meridian's future against those who would sacrifice it for personal vendettas or professional gain. Even if that truth forced me to reconsider everything I thought I knew about the man who had broken my heart 3 months ago. Security Chief Chen's revelations were more shocking than I'd anticipated. The evidence was irrefutable. Emails, meeting, logs, and financial transfers painting a clear picture of elaborate deception. Alyssa Chen was hired specifically to reconnect with Daniel, Chen explained, displaying surveillance photos on his tablet. Here she is meeting with Blackwell Jr. 2 weeks before the coincidental college reunion. And Daniel knew nothing? I asked, though the evidence suggested he was indeed an unwitting pawn. Nothing, Chen confirmed. Their plan was to use him twice, first to gain insider knowledge about product development, then as a scapegoat during the financial investigation. The board emergency session moved swiftly once presented with Chen's findings. Blackwell Jr. was removed immediately, Alyssa terminated, and the remaining implicated executives cleared of knowing involvement in financial manipulation. The external investigation would continue, focused now on the former CEO and his son's activities. I found Daniel in the product development lab late that evening, working alone among scattered components of the Anderson project prototype. "It's over," I said simply, setting Chen's folder on the workbench. "Blackwell Jr. and Alyssa have been removed. The board's issuing a formal statement tomorrow clearing you and the other executives of deliberate involvement." Daniel looked up, exhaustion evident in his face. "So it was all a setup, from the very beginning." "It appears so." I leaned against the workbench, maintaining professional distance despite the personal nature of the revelation. "Alyssa was hired specifically to reconnect with you. The college reunion was staged, your relationship engineered to gain access to product development information." He closed his eyes briefly, absorbing this final betrayal. "And our engagement? Was that collateral damage or the primary target?" "Both, apparently," I replied, gesturing to the folder. "Your relationship with me was seen as a barrier to their plan. They needed you isolated, vulnerable to Alyssa's approach." Daniel's jaw tightened. All those conversations about our past, her regrets, second chances, just manipulation. "I'm sorry," I said, surprising myself with the genuine sentiment. Despite everything, no one deserved such calculated betrayal. "I should have seen it," he said quietly. Should have questioned the timing, the coincidences. His eyes met mine. But most of all, I should never have hurt you based on manufactured emotions and engineered circumstances. I straightened, uncomfortable with the personal turn. The important thing is that Meridian's governance issues are being addressed. The Anderson project can proceed without the shadow of the investigation. "Eliza." Daniel stood, closing the distance between us slightly. "I know professional reconciliation is possible, even necessary. But what about personal reconciliation? At least enough to acknowledge the damage done?" I considered my response carefully. The personal damage is real, regardless of who orchestrated the circumstances. You made choices, Daniel. Finding out they were influenced by others doesn't erase their impact. "I know." He ran a hand through his hair, that familiar gesture again. "I'm not asking for forgiveness or a second chance. Just understanding that I was manipulated into hurting someone I genuinely cared about, still care about." Something shifted inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the beginning of acceptance. "I understand that now," I acknowledged. "And professionally, we move forward with that awareness. And personally?" I met his gaze directly. Personally, we acknowledge what was lost, learn from it, and focus on the futures we each need to build separately. He nodded slowly, accepting this boundary. Fair enough. For what it's worth, I'm glad you're the one leading Meridian through this. You were always the stronger one. 3 months later, Meridian had transformed under my leadership. The financial investigation concluded with former CEO Blackwell and his son facing federal charges. The Anderson project had advanced to final testing phase, exceeding performance expectations. My restructuring plan had revitalized departments across the organization, with quarterly results showing marked improvement. Daniel and I had established a functional professional relationship, respectful, collaborative, focused entirely on Meridian's success. He never mentioned our personal history again, accepting the boundaries I'd established that night in the lab. As for Alyssa, she had disappeared after her termination, reportedly returning to her father's business on the West Coast. The elaborate revenge scheme had ultimately failed, strengthening Meridian rather than destroying it. On the anniversary of what would have been our wedding day, I found a small package on my desk, a custom thumb drive containing the completed code for the Anderson encryption protocol, ready for patent filing. The note attached read simply, "You made this possible. Thank you for seeing beyond our past to what could be built." No mention of personal feelings, no inappropriate boundary crossing, just professional acknowledgement of a successful project shepherded through difficult circumstances. I sent a brief response. Congratulations to you and your team. Meridian's future is stronger because of this work. That evening, as I watched the sunset from my office, I realized I no longer thought of myself as someone's discarded second choice. I was Eliza Morgan, CEO, architect of Meridian's transformation, defined by my achievements rather than my broken engagement. Sometimes career success is the most meaningful revenge, not because it hurts the person who wounded you, but because it reminds you of your own value beyond that wound. Daniel would always be part of my story, both professionally and personally. But he was no longer the defining chapter, merely an important plot point in a much larger narrative I was writing for myself. As for love? Perhaps someday, but not as a desperate grasp for validation or fear of being alone. When it came, it would be between equals, with clear eyes and honest hearts. Until then, I had a company to lead, innovations to champion, and a life to build. One decision, one achievement, one day at a time. The flowers had long since wilted and been discarded. The engagement ring was locked away in a safe deposit box, neither worn nor returned. The wedding venue now hosted someone else's celebration, and I was exactly where I needed to be. Not defined by what I'd lost, but by what I'd built from its ashes. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.